Good evening. I've just finished reading The Witness for the Dead by Katherine Addison. This is a murder mystery, but set in a fantasy universe. So the main character, Kelleher, is a witness for the dead. This is a unique job that exists in this society, and it seems to be kind of a combination of a priest who handles things like funeral rites and an investigator who stands for the dead, especially when the deceased is unidentified, if it's unclear how they died or who they were. So, for instance, if you get a dead body and no one knows their identity, then he's the person that you would call in to try to figure all of that out. So Kelleher is also unique in that he's one of the witnesses who do actually have the ability to communicate with the dead. Of course, it has to happen soon after they die because traces of a person's spirit do fade over time, and they can also be washed away by water and stuff. But if he can touch their remains, typically within 1 to 2 weeks of when they passed away, then he can kind of get a feel for what their last moments were how they felt, I guess, when they were dying, and sometimes he can also ask them questions. So really common things that people come to him for are for instance, to solve problems of inheritance. He might be able to ask the deceased who they intended to leave something to, or if someone passes away without, say, telling their spouse where they hid the extra money, he might be able to find that out for them. So even though his job is really important and also his ability is very helpful, these things don't exactly make him very popular, especially since a lot of the time the answers that the dead give you might not actually be what the living wants to hear. So Kelleher is relatively new to the city of Amalo. He's pretty obviously, I guess, getting past some past personal traumas and tragedies, and he's also naturally a more reclusive kind of person. He's not very good at socializing, and he on the whole prefers to spend his time with the dead rather than the living. But he does care very deeply about his duties, and so this book follows his investigations of I guess basically 2 cases. So first, there was a woman who was fished out of the river. Because she's been in the water, he can't really get anything a name from her, but he was able to learn that she was murdered, it wasn't suicide, and he was able to determine where she was killed. So he begins to look into her background, who she might have been and why she might have been killed, as well as who might have done it. And this takes him to a lot of places in the city that he hasn't really visited before, like gambling houses and opera houses and stuff like that. Then we have a case with one of the his current petitioners who came to him because he's convinced that his sister was murdered by her husband, and that she and her unborn child are buried somewhere in the city's cemetery. So this is a pretty good bet because funeral rites, proper funeral rites, are really, really important in this world. I'll talk more about that a little later. But in his search for the missing woman or potentially murder victim, he discovers that not only is it very likely that she was murdered, it's entirely possible that she was not the person's first victim. So this is a more traditional kind of murder mystery. It follows Kelleher as he talks to a lot of different people, asks a lot of questions, and explores who these people were, the relationships they had with the people around them, when they were alive, and what exactly led to the circumstances of their death. I had a lot of fun with it too. It was really interesting to hear about these different jobs, I guess, that exist in the society and the culture that they have and their general way of life. It took me a while to figure out, but apparently this is a world at least so far as I can tell, it doesn't actually have any humans. Like, it's primarily elves, goblins, or some combination of the two. Like, I knew he probably wasn't human because he got a lot of references with characters to, like, the movement of their ears in regards to, like, their expression of emotion. But, yeah, it kind of took me a while to figure out. And you also get like a really good glimpse into what life is like as a witness for the dead, especially since as someone who does have the ability to communicate with the deceased, Kalahar can handle like the whole gambit of stuff that they usually do, which actually includes dealing with ghouls. So ghouls are why things like proper funeral rites are so important, because a recently deceased person, actually it doesn't even have to be recent by the sound of it, just as long as like the body is intact enough, can become a ghoul if their grave is not properly tended to. So properly tended to includes things like having an actual headstone with their real name carved into it, and the name has to be legible. Like if the tombstone, say, crumbles and you can't read it anymore, then you actually have concerns that the dead might rise and begin to eat people. Like they start with dead bodies, but if you don't put them in the ground again and deal with the circumstances soon, then they eventually graduate to attacking and eating living people. So since the original deceased person's name is integral to being able to lay them to rest again, people with Kalahar's ability are invaluable because they're the only ones who can actually figure out what a ghoul's name was. Like if you don't have that, it sounds like it's virtually impossible to really deal with them, and it's really dangerous. But yeah, you get to see every aspect of his job and his life in the city, and I find that really interesting. There isn't actually anything I dislike about the story, but I will say that I occasionally found it a little confusing because it's the kind of world that uses a lot of its own jargon, like a lot of different words. Like for instance, it's not, priest is not actually the word they use prelate, and I'm just deducing from their role in society that it's very similar to what we would consider a priest. And there's also, different words to refer to, people in different gender categories, and there are it doesn't really take the time, I guess, to explain things to you, which is why, for instance, I said that there are elves and goblins and mixtures, but no humans. It doesn't go into things like the whys of society, because it treats the story kind of like if you were writing it in our world, where there's a lot of things that you wouldn't necessarily have to explain. You just kind of have to work it out from what you see as you follow Kalahar through his life. Like for instance, I hadn't actually pegged the level of technology yet either. Like they have airships and they have a tram, but I don't think they have things like cars. So, whatever that would mean. But yeah, I had fun reading the story, and I've already started reading the sequel.